Hi, I'm Dr. Chad Larson. Thanks for joining me in another episode of Keep It Real. So I want to discuss a couple different topics that seem to be kind of on the rise with certain people, and the two topics are hormone imbalances and autoimmunity, and particularly a condition that combines both of those things, which is called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So Hashimoto's thyroiditis is an autoimmune thyroid problem. So what happens in autoimmune thyroid is the immune system kind of mistakenly targets a component of the thyroid gland, making the thyroid gland have a problem with producing thyroid hormone called thyroxine, or T4. And so if T4 goes down because the thyroid is being destroyed by the immune system, then a person suffers from hypothyroidism. And there's a whole pretty comprehensive array of body-wide symptoms that can manifest from that. For example, the thyroid is kind of a metabolic energizer in the body, and so if that goes down, then fatigue is a very common problem. The gastrointestinal tract kind of slows down, so constipation can be a problem. A person's hair gets kind of dry and coarse, and so could the skin. It could affect certain neurotransmitters in the brain, so oftentimes depression is part of the symptom. So you can see there's multiple organ systems that are involved in hypothyroidism. So it's a tough condition to deal with, but it's pretty common, unfortunately. And the majority of people who are suffering from hypothyroidism are actually suffering from an autoimmune hypothyroidism. So the immune system is targeting that component of the thyroid, making the body not able to produce thyroid hormone, or T4. And so this could be a big problem. And so there's a study that I read just recently that I wanted to mention today. It was published just weeks ago in a journal called Advanced Biomedical Research. And here's what they did. They looked at people with autoimmune thyroid, and the way this is evaluated in a lab test is they measure a blood marker called anti-TPO antibodies. The TPO stands for thyroperoxidase. That's usually also coupled with another one called anti-TG, or thyroglobulin antibodies. More often than not, it's the anti-TPO antibodies that are elevated in Hashimoto's thyroiditis, this type of autoimmune hypothyroidism. And so if TPO antibodies are elevated and T4 is low, that's the combination of things that leads to hypothyroidism. Oftentimes we'll see TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, also elevated in a response to the low T4. So without getting too caught up in the weeds there, that's a pretty common issue that people are suffering from. And so there's some interesting research that was just done recently where they looked at a particular mineral that is necessary for proper thyroid function. And that mineral is called selenium. And here's what they sought out to evaluate. It's a very, very simple but well done study. They looked at a group of people. All subjects had autoimmune hypothyroidism as determined by those blood markers that I just mentioned. And what they figured out, or what they did, is they split them into two groups. One group just got the medication for T4, which is called levothyroxine. Levothyroxine is a T4 medication that oftentimes, that oftentimes people with hypothyroidism have low T4, so they're put on this levothyroxine medication. It helps to boost their T4 back up. So that was half the group. They just stayed on their T4 medication. In the investigation group, they did one simple thing. That group also stayed on their T4 levothyroxine medication, but they also added selenium, the mineral supplement selenium, to their protocol. And so what they found out is that the group that was taking the normal medication, the levothyroxine, along with the selenium, their anti-TPO antibodies went down significantly. So when those anti-TPO antibodies go down, what that means and why that's helpful when this happens is because it decreases the destructive process on the thyroid. So it's a way that you can start actually working on the autoimmune effect on the thyroid. And so that's a real home run for people that suffer from this condition. They can take the medication and the selenium and decrease this autoimmune destruction that's happening on the thyroid. So That was just published. That was very interesting information for those of us who treat autoimmune thyroid, and particularly for people who suffer from autoimmune thyroid. Just a simple daily dose of a couple hundred micrograms. So selenium is what we call a micro mineral, where we only need micro amounts. A couple hundred micrograms per day is all the body requires, as opposed to something like magnesium, where we need hundreds of milligrams. Remember, 1 milligram is 1,000 micrograms. So you need hundreds of milligrams per day of magnesium, but selenium, you only need micro amounts, a couple hundred micrograms. So most supplements are made in 200 micrograms per capsule. So that's usually all that's required to have this kind of process. But what else is cool is there's a food source. Brazil nuts. Brazil nuts are pretty high in selenium. It's been estimated that each Brazil nut has about 50 micrograms of selenium, which is pretty cool. So if you have, 4 or 5 Brazil nuts per day, then that should probably cover you for your selenium needs, particularly if you have hypothyroidism from autoimmune destruction. Of course, food-based nutrients, it kind of depends on the soil, and you can't really guarantee that each nut has that particular amount of selenium, but just as kind of a daily diet lifestyle practice to start to include some Brazil nuts. You still may need to take the supplement, but I thought that was a very interesting study. Also, I've talked about in past episodes, so I'll just remind you here that selenium is also required to convert T4 to T3. Remember, T4 is thyroxine that's produced by the thyroid gland, and then T4 travels to the liver to get converted to T3. I know some of this is a little bit technical, but just to make the point, the conversion from T4 to T3, the other thyroid hormone, also requires selenium. So selenium has great thyroid support in multiple ways, and since a lot of people are suffering from hypothyroidism, this can help a lot of people. So I hope that helps. I will keep reading the research and bringing you the information. Until then, keep it real.